Because
Yeah.
when you tell somebody, hey, this is yours, it's your inheritance, you own these lands, you are a public landowner, and they want to sell it, they can sell it to whoever, right? It could go to, I think states were given kind of like first priority, but really it could then go to, some sort of foreign government could buy it on it, right? And so, exactly as you said, you're selling someone's inheritance. And I think the people really like push back against that notion.
Welcome to Wildlife Outdoors with your host, Russell and Jose. If you have a passion for conservation of the outdoors, or you're enjoying a calming hike in the mountains, an exhilarating kayak trip on the river, feeling a fish on the end of your line, cooking on an open flame in a primitive campsite, or stalking big game, just waiting for the perfect shot, you're in the right place. So put on your boots and polarized sunglasses and come along for the ride.
Welcome back to another episode of Wildlife Outdoors. I'm Russell, and today we're diving into a conversation that every hunter, angler, and public land user needs to hear. We're joined by Devin O'Dea, Western Policy and Conservation Manager for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Right now, our public lands are facing some of the most serious challenges we have seen in years, from proposals that weaken foundational protections to bills that could transfer or privatize the very places we love. So Devin, thank you for joining me. How you doing, man?
Cheers, man. Thanks for having me. I'm doing pretty good here.
I'm excited for this one, and admittedly so, I don't know too much about, any of the legislative battles that public lands are facing right now. I do know that, of course, I see things on social media of all these threats that we have. Diving into the details, I don't really know too much about it. And so that's why I brought you here. I was told that you have quite a bit more knowledge than I do. So I guess just to start off, can you give a brief introduction on yourself and how you relate to the content?
Yeah, absolutely. You said I'm BHA's Western Policy and Conservation Manager. Worked for the organization for about 4 years, but was a volunteer with the organization for a long time, life member. Quit my former job and marketing for actually an archery company, selling arrows, and decided to work full-time for BHA just because, right around the time I had kids, I wanted to make sure that they had a place to go out and enjoy public lands and waters and to be able to hunt and fish. Hopefully they pick that up. My daughter's picking up archery, so we're on the right track there. We can just hope that stays. But wanted to make sure that there's a place for them to be able to go hunt and fish, and wanted to make sure that our public lands stay in public hands. And that's a huge part of my life is being outside and recreating on public lands and waters. That's how I try to feed my family, although, somewhat unsuccessfully in the neck of the woods that I try to chase deer. But, I get after it every year. And that's, kind of a little bit about my background, what got me into it.
That's awesome. So you're over in California, right?
Yep. Southern California. So we got plenty of public land, plenty of people trying to hunt deer, not a ton of deer, a lot of competition there. We've got predators and hikers and bikers and mountain bikers. It's an adventure every season trying to fill a tag, but plenty of room to roam. So, it keeps you coming back every year, even if you don't fill one.
Right. Yeah, I'm over here. So I'm in Arkansas, and majority of the hunting that I do is in the Ouachita National Forest. And I'm not a hunter. I didn't grow up hunting. And I just started last year, and I'm self-taught, and I'm trying archery public land, and it is far more difficult than I expected it to be. I have yet to tag anything. The only hunting I ever did in the past was when I lived in Texas. We'd go in Central Texas, South Texas, do some dove hunting, which was really fun, but it's far different than trying to learn a new animal, a big game animal that is very intelligent, and I seem to get outsmarted every single time. But it keeps bringing me back, year by year, week by week. Every time that I get a chance to go out there, I'm going out there, of course, when it's in season. And this year I've been at it a lot harder than I was last year, and I've only seen one, and I've been blown at about 3 or 4 times. So I've heard them and not seen them, and it's difficult.
Yeah, that sounds like my story, man. Yeah, I started hunting out of college, grew up fishing, my whole life, and got into abalone diving and spearfishing and foraging in the Pacific Ocean, and then kind of spearfished my way through college. That was how I managed to, save some money for beer by going out and shooting some fish and inviting people over for a barbecue. And, after college, like bow hunting was sort of like the logical land equivalent to spearfishing. Right. And so, I tried to cut my teeth there, public land bow hunting, just like you. And it took me 4 years of unsuccessful hunting, and then ended up going back east to upstate New York with a family friend, and I shot 2 deer in 4 days with my bow. And so I was like, okay, I feel a little bit better about myself. Like, you know, it's just,
Right.
yeah, sometimes it's where you are, and sometimes it just all comes together. But yeah, you got to keep at it, and then eventually everything falls into place, and it's worth it.
Yeah, I know that moment's going to come for me at some point. I recently so I've had a hunting rifle for years, and I've had 2 shoulder reconstructions, and so I just haven't shot it. I shot it 5 times when I first got it, and haven't shot it in almost 10 years. And I went and sighted it in this past weekend, and I'm like, okay, it's good now. I'm great. Like, if I can't get anything with archery, I damn sure better be able to get something with a rifle. So I'm hoping here soon I'll be able to get out with the rifle and try to at least put some meat in the freezer.
Yeah, I'm with a couple kids now. I've been leaning more and more towards just giving the bow less time and taking out a rifle. But as my buddy Charlie would say, it's even with a rifle, it's not a magic wand of death. Like, you still got to find them and get in range and make the shot. So, you know, everything has its challenges. That's for sure.
Exactly. And where I hunt, it's the terrain makes you can't really get the limiting factor for distance isn't, you know, with a bow, even with a rifle, you can't see far enough because it's all just rolling hills and mountains, and it's you can't really, you know, bang off 150 yard shot here anyways. So, you know, even if I do have my rifle sighted in, I'm good to go at 150 yards. I'm probably not even going to take a shot over 40 to 50 yards in the location that I'm at anyways. So not much longer range than hunting with a bow. So it'll still be difficult, but, you know, maybe I can find some public land that has clear cut somewhere that'll make it a little easier.
I'll have to check back in with you, see how the season goes.
I know, right? I'll definitely let you know. It'll be all over social media if I do get something, because I'm going to be awful proud of it, even if it's a doe.
Hell yeah.
So, but yeah, man, well, I'm glad to learn a little bit about your background and how you kind of got affiliated with BHA. So I guess we can kind of start getting into the conversation. And I guess the first question I have is, what is one of the biggest threats that our public lands are facing right now in terms of size or just magnitude facing possible legislature?
Man, pick your threat. It feels like right now, we got quite a few. So, you know, for folks that, you know, maybe have been paying attention a little bit, that over the summer, we had one of the bigger threats this year was, you know, an effort to sell public lands. So we had a proposal to sell 2 to 3 million acres of public lands in the Big Beautiful Bill. That's during the budget reconciliation process. I mean, we saw huge outcry of opposition to that. I mean, from every corner of public land users, you had like Billie Eilish to Joe Rogan, all under the same tent, all, you know, advocating for keeping public lands in public hands. And that was, you know, awesome to see. BHA, we had our, you know, historic level of engagement on that issue. So I think we had 150,000 people, 50,000 actions in one day on our Flood the Lines Day of just calling representatives to say, you know, we oppose the sale of public lands. And in the way that it was presented, right, there are some instances where, you know, we have these sort of inholdings or parcels that maybe serve no purpose for hunting or fishing or habitat value that maybe would be better suited for affordable housing or something like that. That was the guise of what this bill was being put forth, was to solve the affordable housing crisis. And someone who lives in Southern California and who rents, and, you know, believe me, I understand that. Like, I understand the fact that we do have an affordable housing crisis in America, but there really weren't any safeguards here. And this money was, this is a huge acreage and a lot of really valuable hunting and angling land. And, you know, the safeguards weren't there, and it was bypassing some of our bedrock laws that govern the sale of public lands to ensure that that money gets reinvested into conservation or acquisitions of more public land. So, you know, that was the big one, right? And you know, we won, we defeated that, but I wouldn't say that threat is gone. It may just be evolving. So, you know, where we might be likely to see that kind of moving towards is a transfer of federal lands. And that's one that's a little bit harder to message around because, you know, typically people are in favor of local control, you know, bringing things back to the states. But this is a kind of a concept that dates back, you know, into like the 70s with what was called the Sagebrush Rebellion in Utah. And it's an idea that, the federal government owns all this land in America, and that it would be better if the government didn't own it, and that in fact it was transferred to the states. And so this kind of notion that the federal government should transfer public lands to states is one that we've seen. I think we're likely to see it pop up even more next year as the next evolution of this land sell-off. And I can go into that on a number of levels, but the real high-level note there is that states just really can't afford to manage these federal lands, because you've got fires, you've got abandoned mine reclamation, you've got these grazing fees that at the state level are like usually 5 times higher than the federal level for grazing fees. And so what ends up happening historically that we've seen is when the federal government, when the states, acquire land, they oftentimes have to sell it. And states have historically sold a lot of their land that they've been kind of granted from the federal government in order to just kind of balance the budget. And so that's our major fear, right? Is that if it gets transferred, it would just be sold off eventually.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess we could take a step back and dig a little deeper in the verbiage of them saying for affordable housing. So in the one big beautiful bill, which thankfully didn't go through the way that it was originally proposed. I don't trust the way that it was worded, because like you said, it didn't have a lot of safeguards in it, and it was bypassing a lot of other laws and things that we've already set up in the past to avoid this. But and I think one of which was like, it was bypassing public comment or something like that, wasn't it? Something real strange and kind of shady.
Yeah, the way they introduced it at literally 11 p.m. After an entire day of session in Congress talking about this bill. They introduced this provision, this land sale provision, at the first time it was introduced in the House, and there was no opportunity for discussion. So, it's literally like an 11th hour proposal to sell our public lands, because they knew it wouldn't be popular. And, this is going through budget reconciliation. There really isn't a public input process, right? This is just Congress, making the sausage and trying to balance the budget and move things forward. And so, yeah, I think there was a clear understanding that this is probably going to be unpopular. So let's try to move it through kind of quickly and quietly, which obviously didn't happen.
Yeah. And so I'm glad that it didn't, but they were talking about affordable housing this, affordable housing that, and it was kind of like you said earlier, it was the guys that were trying to go under. So I don't understand how that even makes sense, because this is prime property and it's going to go to the highest bidder, which the way that things operate in this country is most likely going to be some type of corporation that's going to be buying it or anything. It's not really going to affect affordable housing. And if there's going to be any type of federal property sold to, help with affordable housing, I would assume that there's property like defunct army bases or military bases or things in the inner cities, or there's federal properties all over the place. It's not hunting and angling property that probably could have been utilized and done much better for affordable housing for that reason. So I'm not sure if you have an answer and input on that, but is there any, because it seems like it almost like fits a pattern of previous times they try to sell something, where first they'll deregulate it and then they'll try to sell it, or they try to sell it pushing a different narrative, and then that doesn't even happen. So to me, it almost seems like a money grab for, just real estate, because it's not going to be the everyday person that's going to be able to afford to buy that property anyways and put anything on it. A lot of these are, way off the grid, and it just doesn't make sense in terms of affordable housing to me.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big sticking points is, I think housing would be more appropriate. So scratch the affordable part, right? I think there are a lot of concerns that, are we just talking about luxury estates?
Right.
And then when you looked at the details of what the legislation said, it was not just housing, but it was infrastructure related to housing, which is a hugely broad term. And so, does that mean golf courses? Does that mean supermarkets? Like, what are we talking about? What is infrastructure related to housing? And so that was the really big, the biggest sticking points for us were that the safeguards were not there. The language was really broad. The amount of acreage that was open, potentially available for sale included a huge number of public land parcels that our constituents, our members had a lot of connections to. And that was part of our messaging as we, shared a map that showed, these are all the things that could be sold. We do have a story here. And I mean, we had like 30, 40, 50 stories of people hunting, fishing, going out, getting their first bull, or hunting with their parents, or getting engaged. Like, all the stories we heard from these parcels was really overwhelming, and that was what we wanted to say is, like, there's a process to sell federal lands. We have resource management planning, and lands are identified for disposal. And we have laws like the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act, where those monies get reinvested in the conservation, and the Federal Land Policy and Management Act that dictates how lands should be sold, should the federal government want to dispose of some lands. But this really bypassed all of that. All that money was just going into the general fund, and there were no safeguards there. So yeah, I think your question about affordable housing was really what we zeroed in on as, this. We need more details. We need more specificity if we're going to be talking about this. And there have been bills in the past that are compromise bills that in Nevada, there have been bills that around Vegas and some of the different counties there, where there have been lands that have been kind of sold off, or basically like traded in legislation for other conservation gains. So hey, this land here is suitable for housing. We're gonna section this off to the federal government for housing, but we're going to take, these other lands here that we know have migration corridors, or they're valuable for hunting and fishing, and we're going to designate those as wilderness, or whatever it is, in different types of conservation measures, that we ensure there's kind of a balance there back and forth. I mean, we didn't see a balance there with Congress's proposal over the summer.
Yeah, and it seems like there's been a lot of proposals that have come through that seem real broad in language. And I may be mistaken, but majority of them seem to be headed by Senator Mike Lee. Is he? Why do you know why, or do you have any opinions on why he might be the front runner on putting these proposals out pertaining to public lands?
I think he's just been a long time critic of having public lands. Really, like he's definitely a supporter of transferring federal lands to states. His own state, Utah, basically supported a lawsuit that sought to, challenge the federal government's ownership of lands, and wanted to transfer about 18 million acres of federal lands in the state of Utah. Even though when the state was, officially brought into the union, it stated that they had no right to those lands. They, they basically relinquished all title to any kind of federal lands. And so, that lawsuit really didn't stand a chance. They went straight to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court just said, we're not touching this. They may refile that lawsuit in district court. That kind of remains to be seen. But yeah, I'd just say, he is a vestige of the Sagebrush Rebellion, and that kind of concept of sort of opposing federal public land management and control. And so he's introduced a number of bills that kind of push back against federal lands, and yeah, he's definitely sort of ground zero for that that issue and public land sales.
I don't understand the mentality of that. Like, I mean, I'm a proud American. I love this country, and I feel like that is one of the main things that sets us apart as constituents of the government that we have. Is we have these federal lands. They're everybody's lands. You can walk them, you can hike them, you can fish them, you can hunt them, you can camp on them. Like they are public lands, and they're ours. And we pay taxes like crazy. I feel like we should be awarded some of that, And it's something that for generations past has been, and it's something that I would love to keep, like you spoke earlier, for our kids and the next generation. And, it's like an inheritance that every American shares, and selling them is stealing from the next generation. And I don't see why anybody would think that it's a good idea to not only transfer or to sell. I don't understand it at all.
No, and I think that's why we saw such a backlash, right? Because when you tell somebody, hey, this is yours, it's your inheritance, you own these lands, you are a public land owner, and they want to sell it to, they can sell it to whoever, right? It could go to, I think states were given kind of like first priority, but really it could then go to, some sort of foreign government could buy them, right? Anyone. And so, yeah, exactly as you said, you're selling someone's inheritance. And I think the people really like push back against that notion. And it's not just, our public lands aren't just for recreation and for hunting and fishing. I mean, that's a huge part of it, right? That's main reason that motivates us, and that's BHA's core mission, right, is hunting and fishing in a natural setting. But they're also the headwaters of a a lot of the water that we drink, it's clean water. It's forests that you're talking about, air quality. There's so many different layers to public lands that there are these ecosystem services that we don't even really have an ability to kind of like quantify economically. But once they're gone, right? You never get them back.
Absolutely. Now I'd like to tell you about a couple of our sponsors. First, we have Bucked Up. When you're out in the wild, whether you're stalking a trophy buck, casting for that elusive bass, or trekking through rugged terrain, you need more than just grit. You need fuel that matches your passion for the outdoors. That's where Bucked Up energy drinks and supplements come in. Crafted for those who live life on the edge, Bucked Up offers a range of products designed to enhance your performance, endurance, and recovery. From the early morning hunts to the late night fishing trips, Bucked Up has your back. Use promo code WLO20 at checkout to receive 20% off your order. Explore their full range of products by clicking on the link in the description. Next, we have Foretold Coffee Company. Start your adventure with a brew as bold as the journey ahead. Foretold Coffee Company crafts ethically sourced small batch roasts for those who find peace in the wild. Founded by Army veteran Joshua Sandoval, each cup reflects resilience, exploration, and the spirit of the outdoors. Whether it's the light Peruvian cocoa, the medium El Salvadoran bourbon, or the dark Mexican honey, each cup is perfect for the base camp mornings or fireside evenings. Subscribe to their monthly coffee club for 10% off and stay fueled for every expedition. To learn more, visit foretoldcoffeeco.com. And so I guess that kind of leads into the next thing that I'd like to talk about is the possible rescindance of the Roadless Rules Act. So from my knowledge, essentially what it is they're borderlands that are between deep forest and civilization that they're wanting to open up and, put more roads and do things along that line. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to characterize it, maybe with a little bit more, kind of like to zero in a little bit. So the Roadless Rule was established in 2001, and it stemmed from a number of different conversations, but one of them being, that we have this deferred maintenance cost, right, of our roads in Forest Service lands. And so, when you actually step back and look at how many roads the federal government has to manage in these Forest Service lands, that's enough to circumnavigate the globe 15 times if you were to stretch all those roads out. Hundreds of thousands of miles of roads. I think it's 370,000 miles. And so we already have a huge network of roads that we can't afford to maintain. And the Roadless Rule came about in part because of that, cost to maintain, but also in wanting to kind of safeguard some of these areas as inventoried roadless areas as areas where they're going to be closed to new road development and commercial timber harvest. So, there's a lot of misconception around the Roadless Rule. And one of the things that I think people might not realize or might not kind of understand is that, within these inventory roadless areas, there's actually a lot you can do. People think like wilderness, no motorized vehicles, no nothing, right? Wilderness is kind of like the highest standard of conservation and, getting away from like the human impact into the natural world. Roadless areas are not wilderness. Mm-hmm. There are actually, within inventory roadless areas, there are actually 9,000 miles of OHV trails that are open to off-highway vehicle use, right? So they're right there. People would be surprised, I think, to understand that. And then, another thing that people don't realize is that in these inventory roadless areas, there's actually a lot of timber harvest that is happening. So, the federal government, when they proposed the rescission of the Roadless Rule, one of their main talking points was fire and the need to be able to go and harvest timber and to deal with fire. Since the establishment of the Roadless Rule, we've treated nearly 2 million acres of inventory roadless areas for timber harvest. And that's primarily for, habitat conservation or for wildfire, hazardous fuels mitigation. And, state by state, you can look up, the specific statistics of how much of those areas have been treated. But I think those are important things to recognize, that there are exceptions, right? These are not wilderness areas. We are doing active management. There is timber harvest that's allowed. And a big point to note is that, in these areas, like in areas with roads, fire hazards are actually greater. So, when we talk about wildfire risk, I think it's like 85% of wildfires are human caused. And of those, the majority happen within about like a half a mile of a road. And so, that's a significant thing to note, that like when we're building new roads, we're allowing people to come in, and that's people dragging chains, or you've got your catalytic converter that's sitting on dry brush, like that oftentimes leads to more wildfires. And so, to just kind of put a fine point on all that, and again, to step back, I think there's about 45 million acres that would be rescinded from the roadless rule, like a huge chunk. There's about 58 million acres total of inventory roadless areas, but there's 2 states, Colorado and Idaho, that have their own specific rules, and those are not going to be rescinded. They went through a separate process. But of these 45 million acres that could be rescinded, this is your backcountry, right? Like this is where you've got some refugia for your elk herds, where you've got clean water for fisheries and for all the critters like we like to hunt and fish. And so, if we rescind this roadless rule, we're going to be cutting roads into this habitat that's really important for these critters, but it's also probably just going to push them onto private lands, and that's going to reduce opportunity then as well.
Yeah, and it also fragments multiple lanes of traffic in terms of the wildlife where they're migrating and things like that. Like it segments it, so it affects the potential for reproduction for these animals, in addition to also the fire risk. But one thing that I thought was real strange about the way that they worded it was they said, oh, well, we can do it to manage fire risk. Well, there's been numerous times, and you touched on it earlier, that there's been projects where they've gone and done timber harvest, and they've put temporary dirt roads in just to be able to manage things, such as wildfire management, timber harvest, things of that nature. There's been projects that have been approved by the government, and there's a process to go through that, get the project created, get the project voted on and approved. So it's not like we're not doing anything in these areas, but they almost worded it as if we're not. And they're like, well, if we don't do this, it's a huge risk. And it's like, well, we're already doing risk management in those areas. So I don't understand, it seems like we're losing a lot of stuff. Like there's deregulation on a lot of things, but we're not gaining anything from it. And that's one thing that I've noticed that's in common about a lot of these bills and proposals that are coming up, is that we're not gaining hardly anything from any of them. And then it's like kind of painted with a broad brush in terms of a lot of other things that are bypassing public input, which is just shady.
Yeah. I mean, talk about public input. When the roadless rule was established, there was 1.6 million people that weighed in. That's like one of the most significant, highest number of public comment for a rule kind of ever at that time. And so, similarly, we've had, I forget the total number. I think maybe like 600,000 people have weighed in at this kind of stage of the game for this latest rescission of the rule. And overwhelmingly, those are in opposition to rescinding the rule. And, for BHA, in our perspective, it's the federal government. Nothing's perfect, right? We understand that there could be opportunities to improve, that you can always optimize and improve the rule. But the process that this follows, the NEPA process that this follows, usually you'll get a notice of intent to repeal the rule. And that was what we had. And there's a public comment period. And then you'll have the environmental impact statement stage, where we've got that probably coming in March, where they're going to really get into the details, where you have your alternatives of, the no action alternative, which is we're going to do nothing, or repeal the rule. And usually in this NEPA process, you've got a range of alternatives, kind of an A, B, C, D. And what we're advocating for is, look, if there are issues with the way this is being rolled out on the ground, and there are obstacles that we need to solve, let's identify those issues and put them forth in an alternative. And instead of scrapping the entire rule that's wildly popular, that's safeguarded, 45 million acres of backcountry lands, let's identify what the issues are, and then we can revise the rule. And so that's what we're really trying to drive for, is that middle of the road nuanced policy, where we identify, what's the issue? Let's solve that, as opposed to just throwing out the whole baby with the bathwater.
Exactly. And that's how it should be. And that's why NEPA and FLIPMA were created, right? I mean, just being able to not just scratch everything and as you said, throw the baby out with the bathwater, like compromise, work through it, find the issues within the larger scope of things and pinpoint them and fix them. So it's just, the overwhelming amount of people that oppose the rescind, so it was like, what, 98% of public comment were opposing it. Like, I feel like that's, telltale of, okay, we all care about this. The people that, even do the smallest amount of going and doing a public comment through the process, whether you're calling a representative or going online and submitting the form, if 98% like that's overwhelming. Well, I think if they just try to move forward with the rescindance of it, like, it's insane, because at that point, that they're doing something for their own. They're not doing anything for the constituents. And that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Is like, people have to be engaged. They have to let their members of Congress know. So what we've been advocating is, tell your members of Congress if they can put pressure on. There is a bill in Congress, the Roadless Area Conservation Act, that would kind of codify the Roadless Rule. It may not really have a ton of legs at this stage in the game, but you never know. And so, but your members have to hear from you what your priorities are. And then also, when there are these formal public comment periods where you can get on the record, like you said, 98% of people or so, were weighing in. That's really significant too, right? It's just to make sure your voice is being heard. Because like we saw with public land sell-off, it ultimately was just the cacophony of people saying, hell no, Mike Lee, that tanked that proposal. I mean, that's it. It was just people. And it became untenable for a politician to even touch that thing. And we saw, the Public Lands Caucus form. And we saw, this bipartisan group of members of the House of Representatives come together, who maybe historically, we're in a very polarizing time in politics, but these are the types of issues that I think we need to lean into, where we can say, like, hey, there's this bipartisan consensus. Like, we're BHA is a nonpartisan organization. So anytime there's an issue that we can bring both sides together and show that, it's not about politics, we've been framing it as united we stand for public lands, right? It's just like, public lands is a patriotic issue, right? It is very American to be in support of what is ours and to make sure that we can still go hunt and fish and do all the things that we want to do in those lands.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's bipartisan. Like, looking at these issues that we're facing, it's not right or left. Like, in my opinion, it's right or wrong. I mean, it's Americans' land. There's no reason to take it. And, I don't know. It's just, it boggles my mind that anybody would be on the other side of it. And I mean, I'm sure everybody has their own reasons, but it's just, it doesn't make sense to me. So, in your opinion, what would like a truly responsible bipartisan approach to public land stewardship look like? I mean, obviously, BHA is the front runner and taking care of the legislative side of stuff on educating the public. But yeah, so what would that truly look like?
I think there's like a lot of different ways you could try to skin that cat. One I would say is just an educated kind of electorate. So it's just people that are willing to pay into the system, like we do through Pittman-Robertson and our hunting tags and fees and licenses. There's a huge amount of money that is going into conservation for a variety of species. So one, kind of just the pay to play model, people are hunters and anglers wear that like very proudly. And so I think we got to keep that alive and maybe expand that tent a little bit to more user groups. But, I think having people engaged in the process is massive. But I also think, like you said, like on these bipartisan proposals, one of them that comes to mind from the first Trump administration is the Great American Outdoors Act. This is like a huge conservation legacy from the Trump administration that BHA supported, that was bipartisan, fully funded permanently the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is something that had been established I think maybe dating back to the 60s, but had kind of oscillated in terms of actually getting funding to it. It kind of been siphoned off. And so this bill made sure that $900 million a year went into the LWCF, this Land and Water Conservation Fund, and that money gets used for all around the nation. Like every county has received LWCF funds in America. And they go towards acquisition of lands for hunting and fishing, but also some of it goes towards just, like improvements to infrastructure for your local park, just access to outdoors and nature. So LWCF is massively significant. And that bill also funded a couple $1 billion a year towards our deferred maintenance backlog through the Legacy Restoration Fund. And that fund has actually just sunsetted. And there have been talks of siphoning off LWCF again to potentially pay for this deferred maintenance backlog, which has ballooned to like over $40 billion. These are the restrooms at your national park or your local campground. All sorts of different, road maintenance and just all the things on public lands that we've kind of pushed aside because we haven't had funding. And, I think like leaning into those types of bills where, there's a legacy there from the Trump administration, the first administration, to be able to just ensure that we're funding our public lands. We're not, siphoning that money away. We're safeguarding those lands for conservation is massively significant. And, I could kind of go on and on about various bills and secretarial orders that steward migration corridors like SO 3362, again, from the first Trump administration, right? Like, I think there's things that we really want to identify because I think politics is just polarizing, whoever whether you identify left or right. And so it's really important with the current administration to identify things that we have supported historically and try to lean in and make sure that we're doubling down on those investments, right? Regardless of some of the proposals and things that, we've opposed pretty, vehemently, we still want to make sure that like we're doubling down on the things that have worked really well, like migration corridor investments. And then another one, like the Public Lands and Public Hands Act, limiting the ability to sell these big tracts of land. So yeah, just like a ton of different examples out there of really significant ways that like we can let our members of Congress know where we stand on these issues so that they can go out and represent us in Congress.
Absolutely. Would you mind digging into, so you mentioned briefly the Pittman-Robertson Act, and then of course there's the Dingell-Johnson Act as well, which are both very similar to one another in terms of hunting and fishing. And I feel like I didn't learn about them until I actually started this podcast, started looking into more things. But I feel like there's a lot of people out there that don't understand the part that they play in conservation, because you have a lot of people out there that don't recreate outdoors, or if they do, it's camping and hiking and stuff and not really angling or hunting. And I feel like there's possibly a misconception on, okay, well, these people are out there just killing animals. And it's an interesting dichotomy. We've talked about it previously on this show, about how we love something, whether it be clean water, clean land, clean air, the animals that we hunt and harvest, the ones that we just recreate and then release, in terms of fishing. So it's interesting because we do love these things and we want to protect them and we want to save them for future generations. And we are the only groups of people in American history that have self-imposed a tax on ourselves to be able to protect these things. And I feel like there's a lot of people that either don't know or there's misconceptions about outdoor recreation when it comes to hunting and angling. So can you dig into a little bit about the Dingell-Johnson and or Pittman-Robertson Act?
Yeah. So I'll start with PR because that one came first. The Pittman-Robertson Act, there was actually already like one of the common misconceptions about PR is that we like established a new tax. There's actually already a tax out there, and hunters and anglers were able to instead of that money just going to the general fund, we were able to siphon that money into dedicated conservation fund at the federal level that distributes monies to state wildlife agencies. And those go towards wildlife conservation, restoration, shooting ranges, higher education, management, research. It is like the biggest pool of money that goes towards funding our conservation work on federal lands. And I think that was in the 30s was when PR kind of was originally established. And that's a tax on like firearms, ammunition, archery equipment, all sorts of things like related to hunting and fishing. I'm sorry, we'll get into the fishing side of things. So that covers the hunting side of conservation funding, and then to go into Dingell-Johnson, which covers a tax on fishing equipment, motorboat fuel, boating related items. That also goes into a federal fund and distributes those monies to state fish and wildlife agencies. And both of them require, a match, right? So states have to kind of like be able to put in to be able to leverage that, like Pittman-Robertson loan. And it's essentially like a pay to play model, right? So hunters, anglers, we like pay into these systems through the purchase of the equipment that we use. And this also includes, for PR, this includes like target shooting, which is a hugely significant contributor, right? So we can't forget about that industry that is like paying into conservation at a really significant level for the purchase of ammunition and firearms. And, this is like the cornerstone of our ability to, study wildlife migration, to be able to conserve habitat, to be able to go out and do big restoration projects. So, like BHA and some of our partner organizations to an even much larger extent, we do bitter brush planting, we do fence removals. A lot of this money can be traced back to Pittman-Robertson funding. And so, without it, we would not have the game populations that we do in North America and the North American model of wildlife management, like this unique model that we have used to be able to recover a huge number of species from, 100 years ago, 125 years ago. A lot of it relies on that funding model for Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson.
Which is something that's inherently different from the rest of the world. We've had a few guests on from different parts of the world, and other countries don't have really anything like that. And you can tell. I mean, there's people that have talked about how they've tried to get into hunting in different countries, whether it be New Zealand or Colombia or in the UK. It's far different, and it all starts with regulation and or deregulation. And I feel like we're still trying to find a good balance here in the US, but I think we have a solid foundation, and other countries don't have that. And so people may not know about how outdoor recreation is in other countries, but it is far different. I mean, polar opposite from what it is here. And we have something special that we need to protect. And I just feel like there's some people that maybe don't know. And I don't know all the details on it, but I know, like, in particular, like the scimitar horned oryx is one of those animals that has been affected by it. And I don't know the details, but I know that there was an individual that was, these magnificent creatures, we got to protect them. They shouldn't be able to hunt them anymore. Well, a lot of people were actually breeding them because that's how they made a living, by selling permits and hunts for this animal. And if they're not able to make money on it anymore, and if I'm not mistaken, the scimitar horned oryx is almost extinct in its native habitat. Well, then the people that were actually raising them on ranches and things like that in order to hunt were like, if people ain't going to hunt them, then we're not going to breed them anymore, and there's no reason to have them. Well, then that's going to actually lead to less of these animals being on the earth. So, I mean, there's a fine balance, and I feel like some people just don't know, and they may think they're doing something good, but in the long run, they're probably not, because that money is not going into the conservation of that species or species like it. So,
yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. And it's just the term venison diplomacy comes to mind, where, it's just being able to share your harvest with people that maybe aren't aware of those things. And so I think as hunters, like, when we are successful being able to go out and talk to other people about these really important conservation issues, these bipartisan opportunities to come together, these, funding mechanisms that drive the bulk of conservation on our public lands, doing that over, venison burger, steak, whatever it is, like, it's really effective and really important. And I think it's one of my favorite things personally about hunting. I got into hunting because of the food, and it's one of my favorite things is to share that with people that, maybe aren't as exposed to it. And not to completely derail us, but I have a funny story about sharing, like, my wild harvest with people that are not, kind of familiar with it. I've done some work with the Cleveland National Forest in Southern California to do some invasive species removal, because they're working on, so they have some endangered arroyo toads. And so we've gone out and done bullfrog removals and invasive, like, crayfish removals. And so we went out and got like 150 crayfish and brought them back and did this big crayfish boil, but to a bunch of people from the neighborhood. And everyone's like, wow, look at all those baby lobsters. Where'd you find those things? And I was like, it'd be really, really illegal if I just served y'all 150 baby lobsters.
Right.
Like,
That's crazy. How do people not
But-
know what crawfish are?
Southern California, man, you know.
Yeah. That's crazy, dude. I love crawfish. It was funny. We were actually hiking out in a state park this past weekend, me and my daughter, and we were catching little, I mean, we have, I think they're called watchdog crawfish or something like that, or little bitty guys. And she was like, Daddy, we can get a bunch of them and eat them. Like, they're like the size of our pinky. We can eat none of these, but maybe someday we'll go find some big ones we can actually keep and cook.
Yeah,
I
we had
love
some
me
good ones, man.
crawfish.
We had some big old fatties with the big claws. Like, yeah.
That's awesome. Are they invasive? Like, were they introduced, or do you know anything about that?
Yeah, they were all introduced. I think primarily like people actually using them as bait. So, and then they just established, and they're just, you know, pretty resilient. Mud bugs, they call them, right? They can just kind of survive through a whole lot. There's a native crawfish species, I think endemic to like Northern California, but pretty much everything down here is invasive.
I see. That's crazy. Are they like Louisiana strain, or do you know?
That's a good question. I did look this up once. They're the red ones, but I forget the exact strain that they come from.
I see.
They're the
awesome,
tasty
though.
ones, whatever they are.
Yeah. So did you have any of your neighbors like that have never really had, you know, wild game or wild animal or crawfish or anything like that are asking to do it again?
Oh yeah, all the time. They're like, when you going back out? Well, easy guys, you know. There's a reason why we can't, you know, the sale of wildlife is illegal. You know, you gotta go get it yourself.
Exactly. Got to put in the effort.
Yep.
Here in Arkansas, we have something called the World Championship Squirrel Cook-Off. And it's, you know, essentially it's a cooking competition that the main course has to be squirrel. And I've had squirrel so many ways that I would have never thought that you could even have squirrel. I mean, phenomenal chefs out there. But there was a gentleman there that had some smoked squirrel sausage and completely went over my head that you can't buy wild game. And I was like, dude, where can I buy this? Because it was like some of the best sausage I've ever had. But it was squirrel. And he just used chicken skins and chicken fat for the fat content in it. And I mean, it was delicious. I was like, man, I wish I could buy. Like he was just there cooking it up. And of course he can give out samples. He could sell it. And I was like, man, I guess I just need to go out and do some squirrel hunting and try to get a recipe from him.
Kind of the beauty of it too, right? Like it just tastes better when you have to go put the hard work in and you understand like how much time it actually takes to find something and harvest it. And then the real work begins when you got to track it down and butcher it and prepare it. Like it's a lot of work, but it tastes better. I mean, I truly believe that it tastes better when you put all that work in.
Absolutely. I do. I believe that for sure. So I guess to get kind of back on subject, because you get me talking about food, dude, I'll talk about food for hours. So like, what are some specific actions that like everyday people can take right now to influence the outcome of these legislative fights that we're facing?
I'd say just having a relationship with your member of Congress is really one of the most significant ones. You know, you can go on BHA's website to our Take Action page, or, you know, it's really like any organization, whatever you're passionate about, related to public land. There's a lot of different avenues there. And, you know, a lot of these NGOs will have, you know, an opportunity to go on the website. You can very easily just, you know, find your state, find your issue, federal, state, whatever it is, boom, click send. That's the easiest thing you can do, because we've already curated the message for you. We've kind of done the due diligence and the time, and we put forth a really thoughtful message. If you do that, I highly encourage you to customize the message. Just make it your own. One sentence at the beginning is a huge impact. It goes a long way. You know, but beyond that, like actually calling, you know, taking a little bit of time, educate yourself on an issue, or just think about something you really are passionate about. Well, public land, hunting, fishing, whatever it is, particular species, and call your office and tell them how you feel about it. Because they are beholden to you as your constituent, and you would be amazed. People just don't do that. And they just don't hear from their constituents a whole lot. So when you do that, at the state and federal level, like I highly encourage you to do it at both your state government level and federal level. Like they do listen, and that does help dictate policy. So I would say that's probably one of the number one most important things we can do. We do, you know, tracking these kind of bigger picture, higher profile issues like the Roadless Rule. There will be another opportunity for public comment come March at the Federal Register. So, if you go to the Federal Register, this is just a website the government hosts where you can see all of their actions relating to, the Roadless Rule or the Public Lands Rule or any number of different kind of issues that are impacting our public lands. And so you can also just go there and kind of see what they're proposing to do. There's the, Waters of the United States rule that is just recently been, announced to be rescinded. And so, or there's I think it's a new proposed rule technically, but that's something that BHA will have some content out here very shortly. I think actually it may have gone up today. But this is talking about Clean Water Act, and how that gets, what are we defining as the waters of the United States? And these are your drinking waters. These are where you're harvesting your ducks from. So if you want clean water and you want good fisheries, you got to make sure that you as a constituent, as a public land owner, user, someone who wants to eat and harvest wild game, and fish, you don't want that being polluted, right? And the way our system works is we have industry, we have lobbyists, and everyone's going to vie for their share of the pie. So, your silence is basically saying, to whatever industry is the loudest voice, you're going to let them dictate the policy on what happens to your waters and public lands. And that's just, not the way that's not what I want for when I go out hunting and fishing. I want clean water. I want abundant, deer herds and everything. So you got to make that known.
Yeah. And kind of like a little sidetrack that kind of plays off of that. Interestingly enough, I went and I took my daughter on a bald eagle tour on Lake DeGray here in Arkansas earlier today. And I learned something new that kind of pertains to clean water and how it affects not only just the fish, but the animals. So in Lake DeGray, there's a grass called hydrilla, which, I've seen it all over the place. We have it in Texas, and I'm not sure if you'll have it in California or not. But there's a certain bacteria that can grow on this hydrilla. Well, then what was happening is the coots were eating this hydrilla, which had this bacteria, which was actually causing brain lesions. And then whenever they would start getting sick and acting lethargic, the bald eagles found easy prey. The bald eagles would eat them. And so whenever bald eagles were being affected by DDT back in the 60s, whenever they banned DDT, populations of the bald eagles started going up all over the world, or all over the nation, except for Arkansas in this one specific lake. And they couldn't figure out why. Well, it was because the populations were declining due to that bacteria on the hydrilla. So they started doing different, I think they started introducing sterile carp and stuff like that to help out with the hydrilla issue, the bacteria issue, which then went to the coots and the bald eagles. Keeping clean water isn't just about the water and the fish. Like, it goes all the way up the food train. So that's just something to keep in mind when it comes to things about that with clean water.
So tell me I should shoot more coots?
Right? Too bad they don't taste that good, right? If only they tasted better, we'd be in a better boat.
If they tasted better, I would come home with a lot more meat when I went duck hunting. That is for sure. But I've had some coot gumbo. It's pretty good. I'll say that much.
Really?
Right? I think you make anything taste good if you put enough time and you cook it slow enough.
Oh yeah. You just gotta. Also, it comes to the prep of it. I had crow. I guess it was probably a couple months ago, and it was a dark red meat, and breast meat from a crow, and I didn't know what it was, but I'm a very adventurous eater, and so I tried it, and I was like, dude, what is this? He's like, oh, it's crow. It's like, dude, this is good. I was like, what'd you do to it to make it taste so good? He's like, I cleaned it, put salt, pepper, and garlic, and threw it on the grill. I'm like, that's it? And he's like, yeah, that's pretty good. Like, that crow was better than some chicken I've had. So I think a lot of it's just prepping it.
That's one I haven't tried yet. I'm going to have to try crow. I had, again, not to take us on a tangent, last one here for me. So BHA, we have a rendezvous, which is like our annual gathering every year that we host, and, it kind of moves around a little bit. I think it might be Denver or somewhere in Colorado next year. But we did one in Missoula, Montana a few years back, and Randy Newberg shot a wolf and slow cooked the wolf. And man, that thing was delicious. Like, I never would have guessed that wolf tasted good. But he had a tag and he harvested it and we ate it, and it was amazing.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to try it. I've actually wanted to try coyote too. Have you ever heard of Meat Eater Pardon My Plate?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I watched the one where they did the coyote, and I was like, now I'm interested. And I've met a few people that like trappers here that are like, well, I'm not gonna just trap something just for the hide, I might as well eat it too. And they've said, yeah, coyote's not that bad. So obviously you want to get one that's in decent condition, but yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer, and if you're gonna harvest something, try to use everything of it you can. And so yeah, I might have to try to get me some coots and maybe wolf and coyote someday.
There you go, make a stew.
But right. Dude, I had a stew that was black bear, beaver, and sandhill crane one time. And I feel like it almost sounds sacrilegious to put black bear and sandhill crane in a stew, right? Especially with a different kind of meat. But dude, it was one of the best stews that I've ever had in my entire life. It was phenomenal.
And man, those are 3 tasty critters. You put them together. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was really good, really good. But I see it's getting dark over there, and we're coming up close to an hour. So I guess it's a good time to close it out. And I appreciate all the information that you've shared with us and, spending the time with us. So other than that, do you have any other things that you'd like to say before we close her out?
I mean, I really, really appreciate the opportunity and the conversation. I think we're going to have to get out there one of these times. I don't know if I ever make it out your way, if you're ever out my way to go find some of these critters to cook up some of these strange concoctions.
Absolutely.
Coot crow stew, whatever it ends up being. But no, I mean, I think I'll just end with, being involved, like whether it's on the ground, like going out to trash cleanups, habitat conservation projects like BHA. We have a ton of different stewardship events. Whatever it is, if it's BHA or it's another organization that you care about, one, just like get out on the ground and do it, because that work, I swear, will fulfill you, and it'll kind of ignite some of your like passion for conservation and just understanding of how it all comes together. It's just people getting out on the landscape, doing the work, and then call your members of Congress and support your causes that you care about. But yeah, I really appreciate you talking about these things, and hope we can get out there in the field one of these days.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. We got to make it happen. And yeah, I'm real big on talking about these things because I feel like there's just people that don't hear it on a daily basis. And so I want it out there on social media, and I want to scream it from the mountaintops for people that don't outdoor recreate to understand that there's things in place for a reason. And I mean, it's a very important thing to be out there, in my opinion. So I appreciate you coming on and kind of breaking things down for me and making it an entertaining conversation. So other than that, for those of y'all that are watching at the end, we appreciate y'all watching. Share this with a friend, like, subscribe, and we'll catch y'all next time.
This has been Wildlife Outdoors. Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook at Wildlife Outdoors and on Instagram at wild.life.outdoors. Let's go live life on the wild side.